Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for the invitation. Really looking forward to the session and the interaction today. Now, firstly, I'll put a link into the chat. It's a link to a collaboration space Miro board. We'll be running the presentation on that. All I would say is if you do have the facility of 2 screens, that really helps you for this session. Put the link on one screen and run the video on the second screen. On the video, we will be showing the Miro board so that you can see what's happening. So today we're talking about the concept of harnessing worker insights and really interfacing this with 2 key principles. The first key principle from Safety Differently is, seeing people as a solution to harness. So harnessing worker insights and then integrating that with the concepts and the practice of human-centered design and bridging these 2 concepts to think about how we design work differently. So if you come onto the Miro board, do that, and I'll get Guinea, whilst you're on this, you might just want to post the link a couple more times just to make sure everyone gets to join us. But I'd encourage you to join the Miro board because we're going to do some activities in that space. So firstly, I want to take you to this question. What is designed for work? And what I would like you to do is just to put a post-it note. You can put a post-it note anywhere around the board. You'll see on the left-hand side, just click a little sticky note. You can pick any color that you want and put up here your thought about where is design used in for work and what is it used for? What role does it have? And that can be what you think it should have or what it actually does have now. So I'll just put my little post-it on. It really helps us just after you put your post-it note on just to click outside of it, and that allows us to move the post-it note around. So look, I'll just give you a few seconds just to think about that. I'm interested in your ideas. Does design only apply, to architects and engineers, for example? What role does it have when we're thinking about the way work is designed and the work methods are designed? Where does it fit? Does it have a role? Who might be interested in design? So I've got someone that put up a comment there around, ensuring that things are fit for purpose. Equipment user interface, really good comment up there. User experience, that's someone's ahead of the game there. We're going to talk a little bit about user experience. I'll put this question to you. What about the things like our safe work method statements, our procedures, our rules, the way that we lay out our workspaces and workplaces, the environment? Are they places for design? Do we think about design in that context, or do they simply emerge from a bureaucratic process that's in there? Now, look, like the understandable, making the method understandable for all cohorts. Great comment in that space. And Guinea, just to post that link in again to make sure people have access to that space. Right, just make sure everyone's there with us. Excellent. So I'm going to bring that forward, and you can still add some comments, but I'm going to touch on a couple of principles that are integrated into the discussion today. But really, just going back to the foundation principles around Safety Differently, is the key to thinking about generating resilience and safety capacity are these 3 things that we need to harness people as a solution. It's the frontline people who have expertise, is focusing on the positive. So focusing on getting from people what they know works and how we can actually replicate that, or how we can get to what they know works. And also this concept of shared responsibility. And this is a really important thing when we think about designing work methods, is there's a whole lot of people who have a contribution in this space. It's not just only, the purvey of, how you do a particular task, but when we're designing work, the procurement people have a role in terms of the equipment or tools or, anything, how fit for purpose for those and how they meet the needs and where they make their decisions on, what is cheapest or what is best and fit for purpose in that space. So this shared responsibility is about everyone contributing and working together to think about delivering successful work. Now, the other concept that is interesting in this space is thinking about a couple of things. This is thinking about capacity and resilience. It's also, thinking about our obligations for quality, design, the plan, do, check, act type concepts that we now need to incorporate, and also how we meet our obligations around consultation in this space. So these principles of thinking about how do we anticipate and then how do we plan, how do we design, how do we know what is well-designed work is, the first step of that resilience model. Then thinking about, well, how do we respond when things happen? How do people adapt? What do they do? How do they bridge the gaps in that space? How do we monitor and capture this information and incorporate it in? And then finally, how do we adapt and learn and turn that back into our planning and design processes? So this is a very important theme, and there's nothing new in this space, but it's a very important thing. Then ultimately, this is all about, well, how do we meet those consultations and engage everyone who has something useful to say in this space? And this concept of thinking about moving into design space really lends itself to enabling this to happen. So in this concept, we're moving to an idea that is about work method design. And this is thinking about the method as being a design process. So that might be written in the procedures, it might be written in, it might be actually some traditions and cultures and practices of how things are done within an organization and how you integrate and engage with those. But the fundamental shift here is about thinking about harnessing worker insights to be a major feature of that. It's not handing the whole process over and say, well, we'll just let the frontline design work. That's not what this is about. It is about coming at it from a different position. So challenging the assumptions and practices. Now, you'll see as we talk about this concept around human-centered design, it's founded in empathy and curiosity. It's integrating the power and methods of problem solving, thinking differently about work, but also integrating the concept of testing and prototyping. So this idea comes from, well, we don't know if this way of doing a particular work process is going to be successful until we test it. So the idea is harness these ideas, put them into practice, try them out before you deploy them across the entire organization. And then the next principle in this space, which is critical to this whole process, is the workers done and workers imagined piece. And, we're just trying to illustrate, and anyone who's been in the space of trying to step in and understand workers done, and I'm going to show you some real-time examples of some of the methods of doing this and really discovering work in a different way, will know that there is only a limited interface or intersection between work as imagined, how it's written, described in policies, procedures, and how it is actually conducted. Now, there'll be a range of reasons for that, but also in this concept, you quickly discover that it changes in terms of how people communicate and informed about how work is done, and how the interface between the prescription of the work and the conduct of the work. So in terms of regulatory compliance pieces and how they function in real time is not a perfect match. So part of the process is recognising that there's a gap here, and part of the intention of this process is trying to increase the amount of overlap between these conditions to try and improve the relevance of the way that we design our systems and processes to put more successful work methods in place. So the start of this process is thinking about where we're going to look. If we're going to start this process, I think about what are we interested in. Now, too often as safety professionals, we think more about going and fixing safety. Safety should be an expression or a natural outcome of well-designed work. It's a part of it rather than the driver of it. The principles will help these two conditions work together. So the first thing that's really interested in shifting into this space, this user experience space, is not to talk about safety, not to be focusing on safety questions when you do this, but be intently focused on work. Inquire about the nature of work, understanding from that. The second shift in this space is shifting ourselves, particularly as being the experts, into being enablers. So we become facilitators, we facilitate the craft and the way that we bring people together, how we harness their knowledge. Now, in that process, these are the two hardest things in running these exercises many, many times. When you've got subject matter experts involved, and we as every level we sit within organisations are subject matter experts of one sort or another, but there's others in operations and in engineering and all sorts of areas, is to remove our judgment from the information that we're getting. So when we go and focus on work and get feedback of work, the first thing is not to critique or judge the quality or the content that we're getting back from the front line, but to encourage people to share and open up about what they know and how they actually conduct the work. And the other thing is to drop all the solutions that we have as subject matter experts. There's a time and a place for that, but it's not in the beginning when we're really interested in work insights. If we start entering into that insight solution space right from when we start to move into this interaction with frontline workers, it will quickly shut down the range and depth of what is discovered and found in the process. So in this process, it's very much about going out into the field. Now, again, too often when we think about how we design work methods, too often it's done, in a meeting room, working at our workstations, things like that. But the space to do the understanding of work is actually being out there and interacting and curiously inquiring with the real workers and getting people, to show, how they do it and what is working for them and what is challenging for that space. So this is a critical feature of this whole process. Now, I'm going to just show you a couple of videos of doing this real time. But what I wanted to do is start you with introducing you to a concept from the creator of human-centered design, Don Norman. And I'm going to show you a short piece about the design of doors to illustrate the principles. So I'll get this video to run.
At Apple. But for our purposes.
I was spending a year in England, and I got so frustrated with my inability to use the light switches and the water taps and the doors even, that I wrote this book. If I continually get a door wrong, is it my fault? No. In fact, if you continually get it wrong, it's a good, but if other people continually get it wrong, good sign that's a really bad door.
A Norman door is one where the design tells you to do the opposite of what you're actually supposed to do, or gives the wrong signal and needs a sign to correct it.
Why does it need an instruction manual? That is, why do you have to have a sign that says push or pull? Why not make it obvious?
It can be obvious if it's designed right.
There are a couple of really simple, basic principles of design, and one of them I'll call discoverability. When I look at something, I should be able to discover what operations I can do.
The principle applies to a whole lot more than doors.
And it's amazing with many of our computer systems today. You look at it, there's no way of knowing what's possible. Should I tap it once, twice, or even triple tap. So discoverability, when it's not there, well, you don't know how to use something.
Another is feedback.
And so many times there's no feedback. You have no idea what happened or why it happened.
And these principles form the basis of how designers and engineers work today, commonly known as user or human-centered design.
So that's Don Norman, and the point that he's making about there is when we think, and particularly when we think about safety and controls and work methods, is how we want people to interact, whether it's a piece of equipment, machinery. It should be well designed in that it naturally represents or presents people to perform an action that is successful rather than problematic. And we need to apply this principle right through everything we do, right from the procedures that we work through the equipment that we do, and how that we want to encourage and get people to interact. I'm going to show you now. Actually, yeah, this is what I want to show you. So this is the classic Norman door principle, and you can see here, I'll just make sure that you're all with me, is on doors, and we've all had this experience, you know, you'll have doors that say push and you'll pull them rather than push, and the other way around. So that's illustrated the problematic, and we think that it's fixed by putting a sign on it. So all we need to do is put a procedure, write the procedure, tell people how to do, and that will fix the problem. The fact is, we know that doesn't work. We all see the signs and still do the wrong action. What Norman says, well, you should actually change the door handle itself to represent a natural action that you'll do. If it's got a handle on it, it encourages you to take hold of it and grab it. You'll naturally pull that door. If you remove the handle and put a flat panel on it, you'll naturally push the door. So rather than having to be instructed or taught in that process, your natural inclination is to do the correct action based on the design. So in these design principles, I'll put up a slide here, and this is a technical description of the process to think about in this thing. So firstly is thinking about what is the problem and what is the problem about. So this is thinking about when we go into this process of selecting work, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and the method is finding the right problem to focus on rather than just making it an administrative exercise. You want to work out and think about then, once you understand that, what are alternative solutions? Once you've got those there, looking at the processes, how do you take them forward? What are the options? And then you drive the process and see, you know, has the action or the changes you put in place made a contribution to improving the process? And if it doesn't improve it, you need to go back to the drawing board and start again in that process. So again, in this space, we say, well, when we think about looking at our processes and where to interact from, what we've found is talking to operations is start from that point. And it also may be indicated by some data that you have. You maybe have some insight where things aren't working well in that space. But what you want to look for is a space where work is difficult, that's occurring. And the reason we say this is this is really important to firstly have people engaged in it. This is something that's important to them. And also it's a space where people feel they can communicate because they're not trying to defend something. I noticed someone has put up there, you know, a comment around understanding the user requirements. That's a really critical key of this process, and we'll drill into that a little bit more. And please feel free anywhere as we go through these slides to put a note or observation using the post-it note tool. That we welcome that. So this leads us into a process of discovery. We start this process is thinking about starting with the work, not with the obligations or the rules that we're trying to satisfy in that process. We can come back to that, and that's where, you know, subject matter experts will interface with that and look at the designs that we cover. Secondly, in this space, where it is all about discovering variation. You're really interested in where people vary from the existing process or rule or method or procedure, whatever that is. In that variation is going to become the insight, because the variation will contain the ideas that will allow you to adapt successfully, and they will also identify the potential areas that are going to lead into an unwanted event as well. So exploring that variation, and you're really interested in getting people to explain how they do things when the procedure or the rule or the plan doesn't fit the situation that they're working on. And this happens nearly in every interaction of work. So how do they bridge the gaps? And how do people actually get what they need to complete the task that they're doing? And where do they get that from, in essence? So when we look at that process, and in the method, this is as a curious, naive inquirer, thinking about what are you looking for when you're looking at work and moving into this space, is when you're trying to harness worker insights, it's through observations, and through those observations, you can ask better questions of the people doing the work so they can explain the way that they're approaching it. So these are sort of things, is looking at the reach of people, looking at the clearance that people have got, look the nature of movement that people are using, what postures are required to undertake the work, the amount of exertion that's happening into that space, thinking about the interactions that are required, looking at thinking about and looking at the tools, and what's the work environment like, and that can be the layout, it can be the conditions, heat, cold, you know, all those sorts of things. There's a lot to explore in that space. So having that observation space is a really important place to start. So the tools that you need to harness these worker insights, it's really important to try and be capture as much as you can through the interactions that you have. Now, the first tool that we need to bring into these worker interactions is ethnographics, and applying the skills of ethnographics to really understand from a curious point of view how people work together, how they function, how they communicate, all those sorts of things. Now, in terms of technology has added a lot to our capability in this space. From our perspective, video is a really important tool. And I'm going to show you some examples of that very shortly. But the use of things like static cameras, the use of 180-degree body cameras so that you can actually see the worker interaction, what their view of the world is. We use 360-degree static cameras so we can see everything that happens around the workspace. Artificial intelligence is becoming quite useful in this space, particularly from capturing all of the interactions and being able to sort that information into something that helps you understand that. Simulation is becoming a very important tool, that once you get some of this information, is that you can run scenarios and see how they play out in these different conditions. And you know, the obvious tool, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, is having curious, naive experts. And easy to say, hard to do, because we've all got lots of experience, and it's very hard to step into being more naive and switching off our natural predispositions in place. So I'm going to show you a little example now of what this looks like in practice. So I'm going to put this video on. So what I'm showing you here is doing a work observation in real time and using multiple cameras. Sometimes we can use up to 4 different cameras, But what we're really interested in is looking at the particular task that an operator is doing. So we're recording that task, and the second camera is actually recording what the train is doing. So this is actually a train driver operating a train on a set piece of track. We'll also be talking or asking questions as this process occurs. But it allows us to go back and unpack this at different times. We'll be looking at the human factors, what takes their attention, what are the physical things that they need to do, how does it operate from things like screens or interactions, how they communicate, when things happen, how do they react and problem solve, showing something here about the signals and the signaling issue. So this is quite a powerful tool. So again, having these types of tools makes it a very rich process to have a look at. I'm going to show you another discovery experience. This again is another real world experience. Now, what they're doing here is you'll see these cages. So this is a customs clearance operation in an international airport. These are boxes of Evian water that are going into the retail area. And so these come in on these, they come in on a pallet. They're broken down. They're put through an X-ray unit. And after they put them through it, so they're individually unloaded, every box of water. And then that is repacked onto the trolley unit. Now, I'm going to show you something that was interesting. When you go and observe work, I'll show you, this is a photo of that area. Now, it's interesting, when these boxes come in, we observed that there were other pallets or boxes of water, if you like, that weren't unpacked and didn't go through the X-ray machine. And you'll notice this one on the left-hand side is in clear wrap packaging. The bottles are clear and the packaging is clear. And so they're not required to be unpacked in X-ray. So in that situation, part of the work redesign that was pursued in this area is to go back to the other manufacturer and saying, what are our requirements to supply the water bottles for sale in this, is that you don't have your pink cardboard box, for example, that you clear wrap it and and all the packaging is clear. And so that is now a standard and a requirement for how we design work, and say that, which removes all of that manual handling out of the process. And this issue simply came up and was raised by the people who are unloading and loading all this time, saying, well, why can't this be done differently? How come we go through this process? Why can't the way that we receive the materials be changed? And as a result of that feedback, it was. So I'm going to show you a few more case studies to try and give you a view of this process. So these are some real work events. So what you're looking at here is exactly the process of discovery. Going out onto, this is a construction site, obviously, in this space. It's using formwork and doing a concrete pour. And the process is having a facilitator go out, be a naive inquirer, and simply talk to the people doing the work to find out what helps and hinders. So firstly, we go back to those observation tools that we're saying, look for what's happening here. What are people using? What are their tools? You know, how are they doing the work? What doesn't look like something else in this space? And as you'll see in this image, we start to see, it's interesting as we look at this particular job, which was done a few hours before, that it's got formwork that doesn't appear to be part of the formwork kit that was applied. Someone's adapted it or bridged a gap in some way. So that discussion started to happen. And as we got around and had the stories told, what we were shared with was this formwork, which was prepared a few hours earlier, had actually failed and breached. And what you're looking at there is a reenactment of the breach that occurred. And this is the supervisor there explaining what had happened and sharing with us this process and how they recovered. And as you can probably physically see, that they physically intervened to try and hold the concrete in whilst they patched a repair and recovered from that. And in this particular event, this was not reported as part. It was shared by the supervisor because they were frustrated that the equipment, that the formwork that they had been supplied didn't have the necessary parts they needed to do, but they were required to continue with the work without the right equipment. This particular formwork didn't have the Z bars in it, which basically tie the sides together. So this is the naive inquiry is really important, and people are really willing to try and share with their insights about, well, this happened and this is why it happened. And, you know, it's not in their interest to tell you that this went wrong, but they want to fix it and they want to do something, but they don't feel that they've got anyone listening to them to actually resolve it in the normal fashion. So I'll take you to another example here. And so this is a conveyor system. It's again on an airport. And again, we're going through, we're having this particular process explained to us about the nature of work, what's working well, what's not, and what needs to be done differently. There's actually, what you can't see in here, beside the unit that's going to go onto the aircraft is a little control panel. You can just see the back of it here. It's actually inside the door, which actually controls the movement along the conveyor. So what was interesting to us is when we saw this, the next thing that we saw was, well, there's a walkway between these two places. This is the actual vehicle that the unit goes onto to take it out to the aircraft. And what they need to be able to do is manage the movement of this vehicle up onto the conveyor itself and the work that's been done. You see there's something in the side here, which I'll show you in a moment. And what we observed here was this piece of wood that was there. And so again, you sort of become interested. This doesn't look like it's part of it. Share what you do in this space. And this piece of wood, when we had a look at it, was placed there because there was an interlock device. There's an infrared beam that's in that space, and if the truck is not backed up onto the conveyor, they can't advance the units down towards the end of the conveyor until the truck gets in place. And this creates all sorts of problems with managing the movement of the baggage material through the conveyor. So what they've done is they've engineered a solution. They put this over there so the conveyor thinks that the airside vehicle is there, and allows them from inside to maneuver all of that up there. But in fact, the operators can't see where those units are on the conveyor and can easily now shift them and actually advance them past the end of the conveyor. So this is, so there's obviously a problem here. The system is designed for safety, but the safety system's been defeated. And what happened out of this process was went back and actually redesigned the interlocks to enable them to advance the units, sorry, up to the end, and without the use of the piece of wood, and also could do that safely without the operator having full view. So again, the insight came from the frontline workers, and a solution was created from that space. Right. Also going to take you into the processes by tapping into this concept of insights from those that use something or do the work. It really starts to allow some innovation to occur. So I'm just going to give you, these are some well-known examples when you talked about to people and think about how do we design something different where it performs its task far more effectively. This is a well-known example of the design for Heinz, where they redesigned the sauce bottle from people being frustrated and then having to shake the bottle, tip it out, and it never works as function. Well, turn it upside down. So the sauce is already there, make it a squeeze pack, and it's completely obvious. You don't need to know what to do. It will actually function and give a better result in that space. You might have noticed remote controls are changing. There's examples with the Apple remote control on Apple TV and those sorts of things. But again, it was looking at the device and how people use it and what they needed and didn't need, and worked out, well, you can have all that functionality, but if you actually just display the things that are most commonly needed and how they're needed, you'll end up with something which is naturally intuitive. You will more readily achieve the outcome and the process that you're seeking just because it's designed well in that space. I'm going to show you a very famous example of Pillpack, and this is a company that made a bit of a change in the way medications are provided, and it's now been acquired by Amazon, as I understand it. So I will put this up.
Pillpack is a new kind of pharmacy. We package your medication and deliver it directly to your door. All you have to do is tear and take your next dose. Managing your medication has never been easier. Here's how it works. Each month, we'll sort your meds, including any vitamins and OTCs, into easy-to-open packets. Need other items like inhalers, creams, or testing supplies? We can send those too. We'll work directly with your doctors and insurance to resolve any issues. We'll adjust your medication if your prescriptions change, and we'll automatically handle all of your refills so you never have to worry. If you have questions or need to make an update, our pharmacists are available 24/7. Getting started is easy. You'll need your insurance information and a list of current medications. From there, we'll handle the rest. We'll verify your account and transfer your prescriptions.
So this is an example of medication safety. It's interesting because medication safety is the single biggest killer of people in the healthcare system where people get the wrong medications in the wrong dose at the wrong time, all those sorts of things. So they've taken the process over and designed something that meets the medication design of what pills people are meant to take. And then they just do it in a simple sequence where it's all sequenced, it's organized, and it's self-evident when you get the pill pack of what you need to do and how you need to do it to maintain your medication. And you can see there's an example of what a pill pack looks like on the right-hand side. It's personalized, sequenced. This is a very well-designed procedure. As such, it's both from a system point of view and a human factor point of view. So human-centered design is being used in all sorts of contexts. We've been using it in lots of frames, but this is another high-profile example where Stanford Hospital are using the concepts of human-centered design, going to the frontline workers and trying to think about how the emergency department operates. How do we process patients coming in on the ambulances? How do we triage them? And the technique is a very simple lean thinking technique. They process flow constantly using post-it notes, and they come up with ideas, they test some ideas, they go back and then redesign the process. But the key to this is it uses the people who do the work. And it also doesn't accept that you ever get to the point that you need to be at. So it's constantly iterating. And Don Norman will really emphasize this point that we need to think about iteration. And too much in what we do about designing our procedures and work methods is we don't consider iteration. We lock things in, and I've seen examples in large mining companies where it's taken, they want to change one procedure and it's taken 3 years of consultation and work, to try and affect the change. It should be able to. Again, this is another example about the physical space, but this is a simple example about redesigning the boarding pass for an aircraft. And we've all had boarding passes and they're visually confusing. It's always hard to get the information that you need. And again, what the airline did is it went back, and thought about, well, what does the user need? How can we visually represent? How can it be simple in that space, and so on? And so the resulting design, is very simple. It tells you, where the airport is, geographically, which airport it is in that location, the gate where you're going to. It then also makes sure you understand the flight. It tells you when you're boarding, where it is, where you're sitting on the plane, and when you're departing and on what day. And it's there in a snapshot. And I've done this so many times where I'm always trying to work out where I'm boarding what is. But again, it's going back to the end users and taking the user experience and saying, what can you understand? And even in this process, you've removed the ability to be able to, to really need to read that process, even if you don't speak the language of English. In this case, you're going to be able to understand the information that's being presented in what is in fact a procedure as such. So this whole concept is built around the notion of design thinking. And as I said, Don Norman, it's an iterative process. It's a solution-based approach to solving problems. And it's really developed around a deep interest in understanding people and what they need. So this is this point of empathy that is central to the concept of moving forward. And so what we're shifting this space is really from this point of view of being the arbiter of what people should know and how they need to do it, is to being one that has empathy to what they're trying to do and how we can help them do it better in that space and harnessing that expertise. So empathy is critical. Having a technique of questioning, which actually goes up and out, not down and in, and enables people to share what they know. Thinking about the problem in a very human-centric way. So understanding the concepts of human factors and really addressing work from a human factors point of view. But finally, just don't arrive at a point and saying, all right, this is how it's going to be done. We do this in incident investigations all the time. We run an investigation, we write a set of actions, and then we just walk away from it. We don't go out into an experimentation mode. Well, let's come up with some ideas. Let's try them out, test them, prototype them. And if all that works, that's what we will go forward with. So it's a real shift in our approach in this space. So these are the concepts. This comes out of Stanford University, and it's a very broad method and principle. But what this is saying is, when you're looking at work and when you're looking at how people do work, and when they're using the tools that we provide them, whether they be physical things or whether they be written or whatever, the first, these are the questions that people are needing to know and to satisfy. Is what we provided with them useful? Is it usable? How findable is it? And we don't have to look far into our safety management systems to know things are very difficult to find. And if you find something, is it credible? Is it something that the end users want? This solves a problem for them. Is it accessible? And finally, do they consider it to be a valuable contribution to the work that they're doing? So these are the tests that we need to apply when we're designing work and designing the work method. How well do we satisfy these elements? And that shouldn't be determined by ourselves. It has to be determined from the people that use the output of this product. So just to, now this is the actual expression of the method. This is how the process works. We've talked about going into that when work is difficult space. When we find what we need to do, this is the mode that we go through. Again, Stanford University method, and this is a universal model of human-centered design. The first plate to start is pick what's the problem you're trying to solve, Don Norman would say. Then go into a listening mode. And you need to let that expand out to diverge before you then start to think about, well, where are we going to zero in and look on? But diverge and then converge in that space. Then once you move in that space, you need to treat what you look at with empathy and without judgment. And again, you start to look at the ideas that sit within this process and then start to converge and define the process that you're trying to resolve. You then move into the ideate mode. So this is freelance idea generations. And this is where you allow the particular people involved, but subject matter experts can contribute to the space, and you start to generate ideas. And from that, you work out what you're going to take forward to prototype and test. And then once you've got it into a stable state, and you know it works, you can then look at the process of deploying it at scale across the organization. So in this process, we're really interested in thinking about how do we really harness this idea of people being a solution harness. This is just a couple of final examples in this space. This was one that was done by Sinclair Knight Merton working for Shell and constructing retail service stations. And again, there's issues here with working at heights. What SKM did was they went back to the local contractors, and these were contractors in Indonesia, and said, well, how would you do this? And the first thing they said, well, we wouldn't build canopies, at over 6 meters of elevation. It's a difficult time and dangerous, and had resulted in fatalities occurring in that space. What they said is, why don't we build it on the ground, right? And then build it on pneumatic rams and elevate it into position. And that's exactly what was done in that space. And the interesting part of the interesting part was, firstly, the engineers were asked, well, why don't we build it on the ground and elevate it into space? And the response was, no one's ever asked us that question. We're just giving you the work method based on how we've traditionally done it. So they said, well, if you ask us that question, we can do it differently. And so they designed this. The end result was that they reduced the construction time for a canopy from 45 days down to approximately 7 days. And they reduced the work at height value from 3,250 hours per canopy to less than 50 hours per canopy. So significant improvement in safety, productivity, a much better outcome. The idea came from a worker insight in that space. And then the last idea, that's really important is, particularly in the safety space, is really trying to understand and focus on the things that matter. And in our case, it's really thinking about critical risk and critical controls. And the shift is to take this worker insight method and apply it to these difficult areas of work, and combine the knowledge of the subject matter experts with the people who actually do the work and use the controls. So in this domain, what has become clear to us is there's a number of things that need to be examined. Is firstly, if you're looking at a control strategy, applying controls, say to working at height, given that we've just used that example, you need to understand, well, where do your controls fit on the hierarchy? How do the controls sit in terms of the organizational human factors? Are we depending on, is it depending on well-designed procedures? Does it depend on maintenance? Does it depend on training? All those sorts of things. We need to understand the human factor. That user experience piece is testing it to see how well it fits with the user's needs who are applying the control strategy. We need to understand how well it's aligned for the needs of the worker. Does it help or hinder the worker in doing the job? And does it help or hinder the actual work objective that the organisation or the project or whatever it is, the task that's being done, to be achieved in a productive and safe manner? And then finally, testing for how adaptable, is it able to deal with change, variation, and different needs, and does it adapt successfully? So that sort of brings me to the conclusion of what I wanted to take you through today. It really is taking you on this journey through the process, and what we're suggesting in this space is coming back to this idea of Safety, we need to really think about workers done. We need to harness workers as experts and really uncritically engage in their insights in that process. And central tool is of safety capacity within organisations needs to be design thinking. It should form every part of every interaction we have, and how we design our systems, how we design our procedures, how we design our apps and software within that, how equipment and tools and how facilities, how a warehouse is designed, how stock is moved in that space. That is all design thinking. And I think it's a key feature that we've sort of got distracted, I think, with safety in design into being a bureaucratic process. And what we need to go back to is the essence of human-centered design and user experience, and bring it to life in creating safer and better workplaces. So at that point, I'm going to pause and hand back to Sarah, who might have firstly is going to welcome some questions or seen some questions that I should be addressing. And I'll just move out of screen share.
All right, thank you, Kelvin. That was very interesting, especially with all the examples. We don't have any Q&As at the moment. Every time I say that, there's always some coming afterwards. With sharing the this link that you've shared, yep. Is this just going to stay there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
People can go and replay. And they can go anywhere they like on the presentation then and do it. And look, we feel, and they will be able to post any comments, use the post-it notes or whatever. We would welcome that. So if they have any thoughts or observations and want to share it with the community that we've got in this discussion, that'll be really valuable. So again, we're sharing this as a resource.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so I'll put that in the email later today, because there's a few people couldn't make it and they wanted a recording later, so the recording will go out later. I will drop a link to the next webinar, which is in 2 weeks, and we've got some other exciting news coming out in a couple of weeks. So still no questions, but I'll just drop that link to the next webinar in the chat. Okay.
There's a couple, I think one question there, I think, was it Nicole Christians, about, she sort of put a broad question there about how do people keep up with changes in processes being adapted and changed. It's a really interesting question, because, you know, one of the things we've tried to do in safety is lock things down and keep them consistent and unchanging in essence, you know. So that's been the nature of our management systems and the quality control that we put over documents and these processes. To some degree, this idea is challenging that space. And what it's saying is we probably need to think differently in that. And it's about having a central source of truth in your systems, having things that are simple and easy to access, but they dynamically respond. They grow and change. And people are informed of, you know, how they grow and change, you know, being the end users in that space, but they need to know it needs to be simple to find, and it needs to be part of that iterative process that they're engaged with it.
Okay, well, yeah, that looks good. There is a question. Alan asks, why is there no specific industry standards for best practice safety practice?
Around this method, is that the implication?
He would need to clarify that. Maybe he's referring to safety design.
Oh, look, yeah. So you've got different regulations. Obviously, under the Model Act, there's a whole series on safety and design, which I think organisations have been very good at, you know, ticking off the bureaucratic boxes, but not actually implementing the intent. There's two things I think we've done poorly out of the legislation. One is consultation. We've tended to do that by distributing stuff, particularly by email and other means, and on the basis that we get no response, we've consulted. What we're saying in this space is you need to actually go and do the walk and physically talk to people, engage them and truly consult. And in the safety design space is get people involved in, how things are set up before they start. Talk to them about if a new process is coming in or a new machine, or they're going to purchase something, is actually engaging and involving them. So there are requirements. I think we haven't treated them, in the way that they're intended when the legislation was written. The UK certainly has some approaches. There's lots of guidelines in this space. Happy if anyone approaches, sends a request through, we can share some of that material. And there's even actually the Victorian government has an excellent book on using this process in workplaces. It's a freely available PDF, and very happy to share that as well. It's very much how to do this step by step.
Okay, I might try and get that link put in the email as well. All right, so that's it for questions. Thank you so much, Kelvin. I hope we see you again further down this year, and hope it's a better year.
It's not hard to be, Sarah.
All right, thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye. See ya.
Bye.